So we've taken a look at open payments, what it is, why it's valuable, what the flows look like, and now we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into authorization. So that's about giving a third party access to your resources. This starts off with grants, and grants indicate a transfer of authorization from a resource owner, so an account owner like Alice or Bob, to a piece of software, the client application, like Music Place. The grant types must match the resource type, so there can be incoming payments, quotes, or outgoing payments. Once a grant is validated, it can be exchanged for an access token. So the access token is issued by the authorization server and sent to the client application, who can then use it to make requests to the resource server. And the resource server can then in turn verify the validity of the access token by also making a direct request to the authorization server. For our authorization, we chose GNAP, which is the Grant Negotiation and Authorization Protocol. So admittedly, most of the internet runs on OAuth 2. If you've ever logged in with Google or Apple, then you've used it, and it's really great for delegating access to information. So if you want to give an app permission to access your photos or your profile data, it makes a lot of sense. And it does this using simple strings called scopes that explain what the client can do and what it can't do. But payments aren't really that simple. And we realized the difference is that we're not delegating access to information, we're actually delegating control. So this is about sending money with very specific conditions and limitations around amounts, time limits, frequency, recipients, So the scopes were never designed to carry that level of detail. We tried some workarounds with objects called mandates, but it made the flow noisy and complicated and started damaging the separation of concerns between the resource server and the authorization server, because it started to push logic onto the resource server. So in the end, it seemed like OAuth wasn't going to be a very good fit for us. And this is where GNAP came in, because it was designed not only to protect information, but to delegate actions. So it lets clients make structured, fine-grained requests like create a $5 outgoing payment to Alice once a month. And that kept our responsibilities clean between the authorization server and the resource server. So for open payments, this is exactly what we needed. And GNAP was so useful because it could really cleanly express all of these parameters that were needed for a payment using JSON instead of kind of hacky strings. So for security, we've got these only successful grant requests will result in access tokens, and those access tokens ensure that only authorized operations get executed, but it still leaves us with two very important questions. So the first is, how do we know we can trust that the client sending the request is who they say they are? And secondly, how can we be sure that the information hasn't been tampered with? So we don't want an application to be kind of impersonated, or for midway through the flow, someone else tries to pick up the conversation. We definitely don't want information to be tampered with, like suddenly the amounts are larger or the recipient has changed. That would be completely unacceptable. So this is where client keys come in. So all client requests and open payments are signed using a unique key that identifies the client to the authorization and resource servers. Excuse me. So these keys are for the client application, but they need to be tied to a wallet address. So even though in a scenario like I painted with the Music Place store, Music Place isn't taking any money in this transaction. So they were simply saying that they were facilitating a payment between Alice and Bob. So the money was moving from Alice's account into Bob's account. But even in such a scenario, the client application itself needs its own wallet address because it needs that client key associated with its wallet address. So a client needs to generate this key, and added to a public key registry before it can make any grant requests. And the key registry will have a list of keys of all of the keys associated with that client. It's a public endpoint as well. So if you make a query to the wallet address and then say /jwks.json, then you can access the list of keys there. And this allows servers to verify that the client is who they say they are. So how this looks in practice, for example, if you're using the SDK, then before a client makes a request, it needs to be authenticated. It needs to be an authenticated client. So you could use the create authenticated client function, and this requires the client's wallet address, their private key, and the key ID associated with that key. Then if you go across to the Interledger test wallet, there's a really easy way to facilitate this as well, which is going to the settings menu and selecting the developer keys tab. Then you can pick one of your wallet addresses and generate a public and private key there, and it will do that for you as well as providing you with a key ID. So you'll see we've got a public key and a private key, and these are asymmetric keys. So instead of saying that data gets encrypted by, for instance, a password and then just decrypted by doing the opposite in reverse, we have a very special relationship with asymmetric keys where information that's encrypted with the private key can only be decrypted with the public key. And this is really cool because it means that if something can be decrypted with the public key, then it must have been encrypted with the private key. So the public key gets registered with the key registry, and the client keeps their private key securely to themselves, and they use that to sign their requests. So account servicing entity, authorization servers, and resource servers are able to verify the signatures that the clients include in the head of their HTTP requests, because they can access the client's public key that's associated with that client in the key registry. So this ensures integrity. It ensures that data can't be tampered with, because if the data was tampered with, it would no longer be able to be successfully decrypted, and it guarantees authentication as well, because it confirms the identity of the sender. If you're able to decrypt the data using the public key, it must have been signed using that client's private key. And only the client has access to the private key, which is why it's so important to keep that secure. Because if that leaked, it would open up the risk of someone else impersonating you. So how these signatures actually work, on the client application side, there will be some inputs, then a function runs the process, and there's an output, which is the signature. Okay, so in order for this to run, you need the request data and the client's private key. So the request data is hashed. It's first converted into a fixed size string, and then that hash is encrypted with the client's private key, creating a signature. And the signature is a unique encrypted string that the client includes in the head of its HTTP messages when sending requests over to the authorization and resource servers. On the other side, when an account servicing entity wants to decrypt this information, it takes in the inputs are the received request data, the signature from the request, and the client's public key. So in this process, the server first hashes the request data, then it decrypts the signature using the client's public key in order to create the original hash. And then it compares both hashes. If they match, it means that the signature must be valid. So on the one hand, the client application takes their request, hashes it, and encrypts it. And on the other side, the authorization server or resource server can take that request, decrypt the signature using the public key, and make sure that both hashes match. So I think we've kind of covered all the big points. There's obviously more to dig into, but to do a big, broad sweep summary of what we've covered so far. Open Payments is designed to make payments better online by enabling direct payments from users' accounts. So there's no need for third-party payment processes, no extra fees, and no sensitive data is being exposed. It's a standard that promotes interoperability. So how it works is that in order for a payment to happen, both the sender and the receiver would need open payment enabled accounts. How we solve discovery is that you can query the wallet address, which is the account identifier, directly, and the wallet address will respond with information on how to contact the authorization and resource servers. Authorization is handled and scoped with GNAP, with resource servers that manage the creation of incoming payment resources, quote resources, and outgoing payment resources. And the quote resources include all transaction fees and currency conversion fees up front, so that users always know what it is that they're agreeing to. And before money can ever be taken out of somebody's account, they have to explicitly agree to it. So they know exactly what they're agreeing to up front, and nothing can be done without their permission. Settlement is handled by the account providers outside of Open Payments, and this is very much by design. Open Payments intends to separate the messaging and clearing part of a payment from the settlement part. And this is also really important when it comes to interoperability, because part of our goal is to make sure that different kinds of accounts are able to make payments more seamlessly together. So the open payment system was designed in such a way that it doesn't have any opinion about what the ledger looks like, what kind of account providers there are, how they figure out settlement between them. Do they settle on the hour? Do they settle once a year? Do they settle when they reach a certain threshold? All of that stuff is up to the account providers themselves. What the system does is try to create a standard space to make sure that communication is possible and we can get interoperability as widespread as possible, making it a seamless experience, not only for the users making the payments, the developers building the payments, but also for the account providers themselves, who could benefit from having a single standardized point of integration. So the takeaway is that Open Payments is a standardized, secure way to build payment applications that are interoperable, privacy-preserving, and user-friendly. Thank you so much.